So let me ask you a question. Would you ever pay Dana White $1,000 a year? No? Well, you must be a casual then, right? Because if there are 12 pay-per-view events a year and you want to watch all of them legally as a UFC fan, then at $80 an event, you'd be paying Dana White $1,000. But since you don't do that, you're a casual who has never actually watched a UFC event. But surprise, surprise, we're all casual, or at least 90% of us are. As of the millions of UFC fans around the world, less than 10% under 29 years old actually buy a pay-per-view every year. Now, if you actually looked at UFC's financial statements, they're actually profitable, and a lot of that comes from the people that do buy their pay-per-views. But that begs the question, why does it seem like no one buys UFC's pay-per-views? And who are these people that actually do? And if 90% of people aren't buying the UFC's pay-per-views, how do they watch the events? And why does it feel like everybody is a fan of the UFC even though no one's buying their pay-per-view? Well, the answer is simple, and most of you probably nailed it. All of you guys are pirates, not including me. But with my conversations with pirates like you guys, I've learned, three main things that actually cause UFC fans to not actually buy the pay-per-views. Well, the first one is simple. Piracy is easy to do, and it literally results oftentimes in a better experience than literally paying for the UFC pay-per-view. And why would I enter like 15 digits of my credit card number and then press pay when I could just use that same 15 finger presses on a website that would just let me watch it with one click? And guess what? The UFC is actively trying to shut these websites down, but unfortunately they don't live on this planet, it seems, because they just don't understand how the internet works. They don't understand that when a consumer finally finds something great, they will make sure it never disappears, especially on the internet. Because there must be thousands of these websites every single event. There's like backups, backlinks. There's so much that the UFC, I don't even know why they bother to even fight this fight. This is an L that the UFC should just hold and just be happy that they're still profitable when 90% of their fans aren't buying their product. But speaking of this product, let's assume the ESPN app actually works on pay-per-view day. How can you expect people to not turn into pirates when you have put no effort into your press conferences for like the past 4 years? And then the card itself, half of the year ends up being terrible. When you have like Raquel Pennington or another female fighter just co-main event every single UFC event, how can you expect people to not just buy a pirate ship instead? And on top of this, there are fight cancellations. You could end up just paying for a fight you didn't even know was going to happen when the original fight just got canceled. How many times have we seen the main event just fall apart last minute? So it's literally a gamble, and most fans would prefer not to roll that dice. It's just way too often that we're just like super excited for a fight, and oftentimes the fights are announced way too early and ahead of time to hype people up, and then you're just like looking up to the event. It's getting closer. There's a lot of horrible UFC Apex events in the meantime. You're like, okay, whatever, next year we're 1 week closer to that event that I'm looking forward to. And then out of nowhere, Khamzat Chimaev has been injured. Tony Ferguson did a backflip and hurt his knee. Khabib and Tony just got cancelled for the 7th time. And then Max Holloway is going to be stepping in out of nowhere. And Friday night, the doctors won't let you fight either, Max. We're scared you're going to die trying to make weight. And then now you have Khabib versus a number 11 in Ala Quinta. How many times has this happened before? I feel like this is just the script of the UFC. It happens every single time. Like, the UFC loves promoting gambling, and I'm surprised there isn't a way to gamble if a fight gets canceled or not yet by the UFC. And I'm surprised there's not insurance companies that cover your mental health for when fights get canceled. Like, I should be able to pay an insurance company just in case a fight gets canceled and I'm mentally disrupted. And when Khabib and Tony got canceled, and it was literally on April 1st, and they said Max Holloway stepping in, and we all didn't even know if it was a joke or not because it was for the 5th time, I couldn't, it was too much for me. But guess what? If the fight isn't canceled, you have the fighters that can just pull out of the fight. It's kind of like when you're at an NBA game, you're like, okay, I'm gonna watch LeBron play. You know, I paid for this ticket, and then LeBron just chooses not to play that day. Or if you're a Kawhi Leonard fan, I feel bad for you guys. The guy literally takes off like 90 games a year. But the UFC fighters can also just pull out, and this often happens on fight week. For some reason, people just can't make up their mind like, okay, let me just not do this on fight week. They just decide to do it during fight week, or even sometimes the day of. We have gotten to the point where there was recently an event where Danny Ige stepped in on the day of the fight against Diego Lopez. Like literally the day of. The guy was just like chilling on his couch, literally watching the event on his couch, and then he finds out the fighter pulled out, and he's like, oh, let me just go to the arena from my house right now and step in. Now imagine having paid for that event. Like, it's like, bro, it's ridiculous. But believe it or not, I actually have a solution for the UFC once again. You know, I taught them how to fix their press conferences, how to fix the fighters' personalities. Now I'm gonna teach them how to fix the stupid pay-per-view model, because the solution is literally that the pay-per-view model is outdated and literally should be abandoned. The UFC should create a subscription model where the pay-per-view is actually included in the subscription model, so you don't have to pay for every single pay-per-view event after having paid for the subscription of ESPN where you're watching UFC Apex events. Now, if they do want to keep the pay-per-view model, lower the price. You know, when you have 20,000 advertisements covering the entire octagon, where the octagon just seems like it's colored in black, where the UFC is so desperate that they're literally collaborating with YouTubers for advertisements, you would think the advertising money could at least cover the pay-per-view reduction price. Now, if they actually reduce the pay-per-view price, not only would it let more people legally view the UFC events, the UFC now doesn't have to spend extra in hiring a team to fight off pirates. There's so many pirates that the UFC will never win that battle, but the UFC can finally let people buy their pay-per-view for a reasonable price, where people don't feel like they got robbed, because it just ended up being that the two fighters in the main event end up hugging for 25 minutes, going to a decision, and then you ended up staying up until 7 a.m. in the UK, and it was all for nothing. But me personally, you know, I'm not a pirate. You know, I can't relate to any of you pirates that do all this stuff. So I actually have a question for all of you. How are you finding your overall experience as a pirate? Let me know in the comments down below. The UFC, I don't even know what they're doing anymore. They just have so many outdated models. They're just so unaware. Like, all they have to do is just hire a fan to tell them what to do. You know, it's like, who knows your product better than the person who actually uses the product? And I'm literally telling you guys, just do this, you guys will make more money and we'll all be happier. But instead, what's probably gonna happen is the UFC is gonna inflate their price. The price is gonna go up, and for some reason, no matter what they do, some people always buy the UFC's pay-per-views because they're just so out of touch with what's actually going on. You know, they fall for the gambling ads that the UFC promotes to them. They fall for all like the UFC fan experience that's like overpriced. You know, that's the type of people that the UFC is targeting, and they're very successful at it. And it shows by their financial statements, because they sell hundreds of thousands of pay-per-view buys no matter who's fighting. And so when something is working, you just want to make sure you milk it and it keeps going and going, even if it's not appealing to the 90% of UFC fans that don't actually spend their money on the UFC. It is the people that, for whatever reason, keep buying UFC pay-per-views, that the UFC can continue to do whatever they want. They don't have to listen to anyone. They pretty much have a monopoly in the MMA mixed martial arts industry, and despite even losing antitrust lawsuits, having their fighters try to unions against them, you know, people have tried a bunch of things to take the UFC down, but they're just a machine that just cannot be messed with. Despite 90% of the people that watch the UFC not purchasing anything from them, they're still profitable. They're doing mergers with TKO, their WWE, you know, they're really profitable, and why not just keep going if everything's already working? And in the end, people, pirates like you, might not actually buy the pay-per-views that the UFC puts on, but in all honesty, it's because they actually don't need you to. Just like the UFC rankings, which I actually made a video on, where I said the UFC rankings are actually pointless and aren't what you actually think they are, where they lie to you and deceive the UFC fan. You could watch it right here, but let me know what you think, and I'm